I'm Rick Schmitz. I have been a working artist for a very, very long time. I studied fine art, drawing and painting at UCSB and at Santa Barbara City College before that. And um, and I wasn't sure if I was ever going to make it as a professional artist, so I studied teaching for a little bit and moved to San Diego with the thought that I would try to become a teacher there. And I pretty much almost instantly found work as a working artist and never never looked back. I did newspaper layout for a while. I did illustrated educational software. I made novelty signs for a period of time, and then I got working on titles like Ren and Stimpy, and Roadrunner and Coyote, and Vector Man, and then from there I went to Sony and worked on EverQuest and EverQuest 2.
Nice. Yeah, so I have to dig into how that transition happened. I'm gonna check one more time with chat because these monitors here in Streamlabs can fool me sometimes. But it sounds like you're a bit louder than original. Chat, everything still sound good, or should I turn it down a little bit, or help me? See if there's a response in chat. Sounds good? Okay. Sounds great. Sounds good. All right. Perfect. Cool. Yeah, whenever I see red at the end, but I know Streamlabs, it's not super accurate on that front, and I'm not an audio person, so perfect. So the transition into SOE, was that your first game job?
No, so I was working at Blue Sky before SOE.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay.
And then how did you find out about that particular?
So there was a community of artists that sort of hung out together and moved from job to job, which is kind of amusing and when you think about it now. But there was a group of guys that basically had been at Jostens Learning, which was the educational software company. Rob Cuenca and Joe Shupak and Tom Moon. These are guys. Well, Tom Moon wasn't at Jostens, but these were guys that I had originally met at Jostens, and they came to me, and Joe Shupak came to me one day and kind of said, "Hey, I've got this cool freelance thing that I'm doing. I'm going to move over to this Blue Sky Software, making games. And, I'm making monsters and doing cartoons and stuff, and that sounded more fun than the educational software I was doing." So then Joe said, "Oh well, there's another artist position. You should come on board." And so I interviewed, and I've got the job. And Genesis Games, of course, that was the 16-bit world, and so it was challenging.
Yeah.
And then Joe moved over actually it was Tom Moon was I met at Blue Sky, and he made the switch over to Sony. It was Sony of America at that time, that we were all working for, and he introduced me to some people over there, and saw what was going on over there. And I think it was Doc Whitson that actually recruited me for EverQuest.
Oh, cool.
Because he was sharing art director duties with Rosie at that time. And so they brought me over as a character designer and as an animator.
Yeah, it's interesting when you were speaking before, my brain immediately went into like animation and illustration, right? I don't know if it's the Ren and Stimpy and everything, but the work that you were doing at the companies, was it was it sort of a natural progression? Because I've mainly considered like the concept art that you've done, and so the sort of transition early on into games, was it a fairly natural transition, or how did that feel?
No, it was actually pretty painful. It was, because especially since I was going from like, traditional drawing into the making Genesis art, which is not intuitive at all. It's basically trying to make. I was an environmental artist, so I was making these backgrounds for these games that had to be made up of these little 16 by 16 tiles, and then they would be grouped in 2 by 2 sort of super tiles, and that's how you would make this entire environment. So and you had like 200 of the 16-bit tiles, and then like 40 of the bigger tiles, or something like that. I don't remember the specific numbers, but it was like making a puzzle more than it was making art.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about especially Ollie's asking in chat if you jumped into 3D animation. We talk about those old console days a lot because it's interesting how many different sort of hacks or creative ways things had to be done in order to deal with the limitations at the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when you mentioned it being more like a puzzle, that's what I imagine. Did that when you got to Sony, and I guess it was Sony at the time. Did you feel like you were getting a bit more sort of leeway, or there was more power or more to work with once you started working on EQ?
It was, for a number of reasons. Not just that, I was able to, get a little more creative and imaginative with and just how much we could do. But also, my primary job when I started was really much more focused on animating the characters. So that was also just getting much deeper into the characters and actually sort of trying to think about them and what they were like and how they would act and how do you make one character, especially after you do a few dozen attack animations and a few dozen death animations. It's trying to get some variety in the performances and the personalities. It's a challenge, but it's also where the fun is, and there's just a lot of opportunity to put in subtlety in those performances, even though it's like 5 or 6 animations per character.
Right. Did you, when you were concepting characters back then, were you drawing them with the constraints in mind, or was there this idea that you would draw them in a way that just conveys the intent of them, and then do your best on the 3D side?
That's a really great question, because when I started out, I was really overthinking the low poly constraints, and I think we found that kind of limiting. And shortly thereafter, I started just not worrying too much about that. Not going crazy, but obviously, you can see from these drawings that I'm not trying to, plot out the dimensions of the model, and how I'm trying to figure out how many polys I'm going to make this out of, as I'm designing the character. And after a while, when Milo joined us, and it was really great to be able to just hand him a drawing, and then he would figure out all that stuff, and it wasn't really my worry anymore.
Right. So, what all did Milo do? Because I've always remembered him as being a programmer.
Yeah, right. So when he joined the team, at the start, he was a modeler, and he was producing the UVs for the characters. And then Rick Johnson we hired as a texture artist, and he applied the textures according to what Milo had put together.
Oh, interesting. And how big was the team at that point?
Well, I mean, there was 3 of us doing characters, and then there was probably another, I don't know, 5 or 6 artists that were putting together environments. And I don't know too much about that whole process because I didn't do that. Although I made some textures for some of the environments when I had time in between characters and stuff.
The what was the pipeline like? Was it basically, because I'm looking at the concepts that you got. Was it concept and then you own a fair bit of that character, or how much back and forth with different people was there?
It was we weren't a franchise yet, so there wasn't a lot of overthinking stuff, that sort of thing. We'd get a list of characters that we need for a zone, and I would just sort of start digging in, start at the top, and start drawing characters, and just check them off as I went along. I don't remember getting a lot of feedback or having to make a lot of changes along the way. People were, I guess, generally pretty happy with where we were going with all this stuff. And after the first few dozen characters, you kind of know what you're doing, and kind of the aesthetic of the game.
I mean, it's not an exhaustive collection of images that are playing right now, but as soon as I saw that list of images on the site, so many of them are what I associate with the EverQuest look, like that classic EverQuest look. And it's interesting looking at like the Drake that just came up, or we look at the Lizard Man to me, right? It's just how much that actually conveys in game at the time, or conveys in game. Did it take a while? You said you had to like stop overthinking it, but I look at these and that, to me, that is what's in game. So it seems like it's synced up pretty well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose part of the advantage I had was that I was designing characters that I was ultimately going to animate. So I kind of had an idea of the limitations and the places where we could get more extravagant. So some characters, we won't have a lot of dangling clothing or things like that, because that's all extra stuff to animate. But if we knew a boss was going to be in a room by himself, and we wouldn't have a lot of other monsters with him, then like this guy, we could get more extravagant and add, we can give him a tongue, and we can give him a tail, and he can have a drooping loincloth, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And forgive me if you mention this part, and I'm just sometimes when I'm listening and looking over at chat, some things will slip through.
Oh, sure, no problem.
Were you handing them? So you'd concept it, and then you said Milo was doing UVs.
Right. So I would do the concept drawing, and I assume I don't honestly remember there being a approval process, quote unquote, but I think we people would look at drawings and generally accept them, and then and then I would hand them over to Milo, and he would model the character, and then I would look it over and sort of make sure that it looked right, and that it that it would be animatable, and then he would rig it, and create UVs for it.
Cool. The sort of source materials that you're pulling from at the time? What was the inspiration?
Well, it's yeah, that's interesting. So this is before even the Lord of the Rings movies. So
Yeah.
in fact I distinctly remember a sort of water cooler sort of chat that we were having about how we would cast a Lord of the Rings movie if we could just put any famous actors in a Lord of the Rings movie that we wanted to. Who would we make Aragorn? Who would we make Bilbo? That sort of thing. So so this is well before the movies. So I mean the source material is pretty much a lot of it is pretty much my own kind of personal history and influences, and that sort of goes back to a large extent a lot of the old Hanna-Barbera adventure cartoons.
Nice.
The Space Ghost and the Herculoids, and all these kind of great characters. These are all characters that were design. He's definitely sort of a personal hero of mine, and all those designs were all super great, and they apply really well to this kind of environment as well, because they were made to be easy to animate, but still have a really unique silhouette and be sort of iconic without being overly complex. So I think that's probably one of the main influences I had, and then of course comics and all the rest.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the shapes and like the overall feel of the characters from back then, especially in those first years of EverQuest. I know it evolved a bit over time, probably starting more around when I got on the team, that era. But looking back, especially coming back to the game after being away for a very long time and looking at the original characters, I can see that, some of them are dated, but still the basic concept and the shapes and just the look of them is so good. I still find it so inspirational. It's interesting that you guys hit on this kind of, to me at least, like this kind of timeless formula, and I especially see it in the concepts, right? So how much were you guys aware of that at the time? How much did you discuss the style? You mentioned Doc and Rosie, and what was that vibe like in sort of that creative process?
Well, when Doc had designed some of the player characters very early in the production, and they were kind of I guess we could call it a non-traditional kind of approach. Some of the ideas he had were really cool, but they were really kind of not your typical, traditional high fantasy sort of look.
Now I'm curious. I'm curious.
Well, I think he had like the dark elves had like cloven feet and things like that. So some a little more exotic approach. And I think that the general desire was to do something that was a little more traditional. So I started designing the characters, and like I said, I had that background of that kind of that aesthetic from the cartoons, and comics as well. And all those sorts of mediums require that you make characters that are sort of instantly recognizable, and that they're very different from each other. And then I had my own sort of notions about just proportions, and what sort of looks cool, and and also trying to get a variety in there. So ensuring that that, when you see, the difference between a goblin and an orc is going to be instantly recognizable at a distance. Especially after, because when we were first designing the characters, we were making characters for the game that we were making, so we didn't even necessarily know how they would look in the game until we put them in the game. So, after playing the game some, when it was up and running, we could see, oh yeah, when you look at a character at a distance, you want to be able to see that. You want to be able to identify what it is, even from far away. So that silhouette just became more and more sort of critical. And yeah, it was always a challenge to try to keep a lot of variety going. And it's I'm glad to hear that you still sort of think about the look of the game and the look of the characters. That's that warms my heart.
No, we've talked about it a ton over the last. I think I've been doing these interviews now for, I don't know, year and a half, something like that. And on stream, we've been talking about it. And honestly, it was one of the bigger factors in the discussion about starting a new game. It was looking at going back in on TLP close to 2 years, Ollie said. Oh, wow. Going back in to Classic, and I was watching a streamer who had shadows turned on. And so, just a sort of simple shadow setup with some self-shadowing and stuff in EQ. And when I saw the shadows plus the old art style, and it was using classic player models and everything, I was just like, wow, this actually looks really badass. This still looks great to me compared to the stuff that I commonly see. To me, I'm more inspired by the amount of character that you see in these shapes, in the silhouettes and the textures and all of that. It was like, if there's a way to just do this, but with newer tech, maybe some higher fidelity textures, but how do we hit this charm? And it really became like a challenge that we were discussing of like, how do we make something this charming that still feels serious in the way that it's always felt to us? So I think it really hit on a unique style, and that's probably something that is a factor in why EverQuest is still being played 22 years later, 23 years later.
It's I wish I could tell you that there was all sorts of deep intent and lots of clever thought behind it. I think a lot of it just has to do with the way I draw and the way I stylize things, and perhaps even places where I'm ignorant about anatomy and I don't know any better or something. That feels really good to hear. And I mean, not to take away from EQ2, but I've in looking at what came out of EQ2, there's a lot of cool designs and cool stuff in there, and they were really going for a different aesthetic. And but I like the aesthetic of EQ and the stylization, and EQ2 tried to be a little more realistic, and considering that it was sort of immediately competing with World of Warcraft, we sort of know how that battle turned out, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I mean, I know there are a lot of factors there, but it was also one of those things that as soon as I saw it, it was my feelings as just sort of a consumer when I saw EQ2 internally were, one, there was a concern about performance, because just like I was like, I don't own a machine that can run this thing, and don't have a work machine that can run it. And so that was one thing. We would see like the demo videos, though, in a lot of them, like especially the environments and stuff, and some of the monsters, there's like looked really, really incredible. And I think at the time, we were pushing it in EQ1 as well. Everybody's kind of trying to push that graphical fidelity and go for more and more realism and crazy lighting and crazy shaders. And so I think it was just sort of a thing that we were all doing at the time. But it didn't really click for me. Kind of my feelings about EQ2 didn't click for me until I saw WoW. And then when I saw WoW, I was like, oh, okay. Well, because it was stylized and painted and it just sort of sucked you into this world, just sort of seamlessly, pun intended a little bit. And there's, okay, well, this is just a different take. Then it got kind of scary. The process on EQ2 versus EQ1 in terms of feelings about sort of deadlines and shipping and sense of urgency and all of that, were they similar? What was EQ1 like? And
EQ1 like in what way?
In terms of with EQ1, what did it feel like working towards launch, and did it feel different with EQ2? Was to me, it felt like EQ2 kind of there was a deadline. It was, we've got to get out, especially then once the launch window of WoW came out and all of that. But it felt like it was people really slamming and working hard towards a deadline. I'm assuming it was probably not that different on EQ1, but was it a different vibe?
We didn't on EQ1. We didn't really know what we had on our hands, so it's so I didn't really know what I didn't know what to expect. Ignorance was bliss to a certain extent, and there were a lot of conversations that I wasn't a part of that were all about just how what were the servers going to be able to handle, and what sort of problems we might anticipate with launch and that sort of thing. What I sort of remember was that the character team was kind of ahead of everyone else, that we had done everything we needed to do for launch, and so we were just kind of generally trying to help out with anything else. So I seem to recall one of the last things I did before launch was I created textures for the gnome zone, which was actually super fun because it was all this kind of green underlit stuff that I was doing, and but it wasn't for the character team. It wasn't so stressed out. I think there was. I mean, there's always a lot of crazy testing and stuff that's happening at the last minute, and I imagine the environment team was probably quite a bit more stressed out. I wasn't. I know they put in a lot of heavy hours, and it was a big slog. I had lots of friends on the team, and I know they were working really hard.
You broke up for a second there when you were saying who was it? Was it the environment artists or just all the rest of the team, designers and everybody else?
Well, I mean, I'm sure everybody was super busy, but the environment team in particular, I think they were certainly working hard.
So there was a question in chat earlier. There are a couple, but one was: are there concepts that you did that never made it out? And do you still have those? Are they for sale?
So as we mentioned earlier, I'm in Germany, and most of my stuff is still in the U.S. So I don't think I really have access to any of my old drawings. There may be a box somewhere in the north of Seattle that might have some of those. And Tom says they're still on backup drives, so he might have them somewhere.
Nice.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Um,
It'd be a shame for those to get out, Tom.
yeah, right, exactly. Um, Tom, in case people don't realize, Tom is the current animator for EverQuest, and super talented animator, way better animator than I could ever be, because I just don't have the patience for it. And so I thought I should do a little shout out to him.
Yeah, and folks, you can. Tom was on last year, so you can meet Tom in one of the YouTube videos or VODs here on Twitch. It's funny. Tom is also he is a living set of animations. He is a very animated animator.
Yes. Looks like a. Yeah. Okay.
And so another question that came up was how much did you? So you mentioned playing the game, seeing the characters and stuff in game. Did you play much outside of that, or was it primarily in work? Or
There was a group of us that would do some lunchtime runs, and that was pretty fun. I mean, before the game shipped, we did some testing stuff and died a lot.
Yeah.
And then after the game shipped, we'd do there would be some lunchtime runs that we would go and have some fun. And yeah, I would always pick a tank because I didn't want to. I want to keep it simple. So just fighting is and I mean it's my D&D strategy as well. We would definitely have some fun. But I mean I didn't get very far. Let's put it that way.
Well, and back then it was also a lot harder to get farther. It was actually a difficult game when it first came out. Big time investment.
Oh yeah, by design.
Yeah.
I remember there was we did a panel early on at Comic-Con, the San Diego Comic-Con EQ panel, and there was a player who asked the question, why do you make the game so hard? Why is the game so hard? It took me forever to get to level 40. It was so difficult. And, we all kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, that's why it's hard, because you keep on wanting to play and get, it's that struggle that keeps you coming back and the challenge. So it worked. I don't know if today's player is quite the same as that, but
it's interesting because in the last couple of years, especially, there's been a surge in discussion. I want to say demand loosely. Chad said there's literally dozens of us. But there's been a surge in discussion about wanting something that provides that similar level of challenge, and so it'll be. I think the coming generation of smaller MMOs will really be trying to tap into that and prove that one out, and we'll see if there's something to that formula that's kind of gotten lost as companies have pursued. I think a bigger commercial appeal, like always having to get a bigger and bigger audience instead of being happy with. I mean, EverQuest when it first came out, a few 100,000 subscribers is nothing to laugh at. So
right. No, you're totally right. It's well, and I think EQ was very fortunate in that it struck that balance early on. It figured out that the right sort of cost benefit balance.
Yeah.
And for that time, for that audience, and yeah, so I'm eternally grateful. It was I wasn't part of any of those discussions, but
it worked.
I'm glad people had them.
Yeah. So the like the art pit at the time, especially on the character side, you mentioned playing, or you mentioned sort of playing D&D and having that in your background. Was the general vibe one of like people that were very much fantasy folks? People that had a passion for fantasy characters and the for me, I always think about the old paintings and all of that stuff. Or what was it like there?
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, we were all obsessed with all that stuff, and whenever the next big, blockbuster movie was coming out, we'd all go see it together. Yeah. I mean, Rick Johnson, who was the texture artist, and he sat in the cube next to me. He was a friend of mine from. I sort of brought him on board to Sony. So we were good friends, and and he was a big toy collector, and I was a toy collector, and so we'd always be comparing our stuff and our lunchtime going and hitting Target or something to see what the new things were that were there, and movies and TV and just all that. And Rick was my age, so we all had the same influences. When we saw the same cartoons when we were kids and growing up, and read the same comics. And Rick even had a background in comic art. He did comic art before he was creating textures. Just a remarkable artist. So good. He was so good. I'd say that I used to tell people that he was probably one of the best texture artists in the business at the time, and of course this is a time before you had any bump maps or any other layers of surface that you could put into a 3D model. It was the texture map was it. That was all you had to work with. And Rick just did some incredible stuff, and so a lot of what you're talking about as far as how cool the characters were and the style and everything, a lot of that credit goes to Rick.
Yeah, it's again, it's one of those discussions we've had where the style that was derived from the constraints at the time is still one that's very interesting. And I know there have been some other projects out there where folks have kind of deconstructed it and repainted it and updated it and all that stuff. So, to me, it's a specific style. I'm always complaining about things being too bump mappy, too shiny, too just like paint it in, make it look painted.
Right. Well, and I think I definitely think there's a world where that is an aesthetic that people are it's becoming more mainstream. I mean, if you look at the Arcane cartoon on Netflix, there's a lot of that. That's a lot of the sort of interesting stylization of the characters is just painted right into the textures. It's just a super cool look.
Yeah, so there was a comment earlier in chat that said, "Hey Rick, can you see chat? This has been from PopCap," which reminds me that we haven't gone through the rest of your resume. We'll come back to more EQ stuff, but yeah, carry us forward from there. I think we stopped at EQ2.
Yes, so EQ2, and actually I think I saw in the chat somebody had asked about the PlayStation version of EQ, which I also was on for a little bit of time. I helped there was a redesign of the player characters, and I contributed to that as well. And then after SOE, I went to Turbine in Massachusetts, worked on Asheron's Call 2 for a little bit of time, so staying in the MMO space. And then after that, I worked on Lord of the Rings Online for about a year. That was a great gig. That was a lot of fun, and definitely it was yeah, again, just my MMO experience really played very well there, and yeah, I'm proud to be part of that effort as well, because I think that's a really great looking game, and people are still playing that too.
Yep.
So,
What did you do on those 2 projects? Or 3
so
projects?
on Asheron's Call 2, I was my title was art director, but I was basically the artist
Okay.
on the project, because it was a live team by then, so we were just creating extra content, like monthly, bi-monthly content. We did have an expansion that we made, and so I got a few more members of my team, and we had some outsource help, and we did some really fun stuff on that project, because it was a project that was flying under the radar, because the company was working on Dungeons and Dragons Online and Lord of the Rings Online at the same time. So those were the high visibility projects, and upper management was really focused on those. So they just kind of threw a little bit of money at us and said, go use these outsourcers and make an expansion. So we just did some really crazy, fun stuff. Somebody would get an idea, and the next day we'd be making it a reality. So, for example, we had we were adding a player character race that were essentially like the Asheron's Call version of elves. So we added that player race, but then somebody got the idea that that we would take this sort of low-level crap monster called a drudge,
Okay.
and make that into a player character race as well. And so we just did all sorts of silly stuff with this character. It was funny, but yet it was still a playable character. You could actually play it and level it up and everything. It was so much fun. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What was it? Was it a humanoid? Was it?
Yeah. It was. Yeah, it's roughly like a goblin. If
Okay.
if you look at an EQ goblin, it's roughly the same thing.
All right. So then that was Lord of the Rings Online. Where did you go after that?
So then after that, my family wanted to get back to California. So I worked for a year at a company that was making cell phone games, not smartphone games, cell phone games.
Oh yeah.
And but ironically, it was still sort of like an MMO. It was called Surviving High School, and basically it was like this little soap opera that you play on your flip phone. It's a story, and then every once in a while you'd have little decision branches, and you'd make a decision, and you'd either fail or succeed, or something like that. And you would just go through this little story that was being told, and we had regular updates. We had these regular live updates where there would be new content. There'd be a new little story that you could play, and so what was really kind of funny about this was that it brought back all of my old Genesis knowledge back again, because the phones were so primitive that we had to it brought back tiling, and it brought back trying to make these little simple characters, and so it was funny that all those skills still were useful even after all those years.
It makes a lot of sense. That game sounds ahead of its time. I was just
It really
picturing.
was. It really was. And actually those guys are still at it now. If you look up Pixelberry on your mobile device, you will find that they're making I don't know what it's another high school game, but they have choices, and they have a whole bunch of different sorts of stories. They have romances and sci-fi and horror and all this kind of stuff. So they're still at it and still doing it.
Sounds familiar.
You've probably seen it before. It's I think it's fairly popular. I mean, at least I think they're doing pretty good business with it.
I'll have to take a look after this. The last company I was at in Sweden, we made online online horse adventure MMO for girls, and so there was a lot of research into certain game types and genres and companies, etc. Just because of if we're looking to expand our audience does well, or at least there's an assumption that our audience was into certain types of games. So maybe that's where I heard of them. There's a question in chat about of everything that you've done. Is there one sort of character or piece that is you consider like your magnum opus or your the best thing you've ever done?
I don't know. I mean, every job has stuff that I'm really happy with and really excited about, and also stuff that's like, well, that didn't turn out the way I wanted it to.
Right.
Definitely, I look back on my time at Turbine with a lot of fondness. Just that the being on a small team in the trenches, sort of against the odds, not having upper management sort of looking over your shoulder, and doing something really cool and fun. I definitely have a lot of nostalgia for that specific experience. But I mean, throughout my career, I've I look back with fondness. But the other thing is, with this business, there's always something new that needs to get worked on. There's always a new thing to
Right.
create. So I don't spend a lot of time looking back at my old stuff and it's funny looking at these drawings. It's like I've completely forgotten some of these characters, but I look at them now and it's like, oh, that's kind of clever.
I was about to say that's a bit of a shame. We spend so much time here looking at them. It's like, oh man, you're missing out. You've got to do a little EQ blast from the past session. Speaking of, so again, I only found these concepts, but how many do you think you worked on? Like a rough sort of percentage, or was it most of the player characters?
So as far as original EQ, I think I did the concept work for pretty much every single character, both player characters and NPCs.
Wow.
I think there's some characters that I think Rosie kind of Frankenstein together. So they're like if we had a lion, then she made out of that she would make a panther, and she would make a tiger, and that sort of thing. But for the most part, I think I probably designed all of those. I did the majority of the characters for Kunark. Rick Johnson designed the lizard men, and maybe a few other characters. He was getting more into the concepting stuff. We had more sort of upfront time to kind of come up with characters and ideas and stuff on Kunark, so we had a little more time. And then, oh God, what came after that? Was that Elias after that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I did some characters for that one too. I think that's it.
Yeah.
And then I think I did a map for every game up until the point that I was.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. The maps.
Yeah. That was always a fun task. That was always a nice sort of change of pace.
Yeah, I mean, I should have remembered that, and instead of just grabbing the concepts that I did off to one side, I should have grabbed the few that in the maps from your side as well. I know there was at least one other link. Oh man, I dropped the ball. But yeah, the maps are fantastic. They're so iconic. So this is it's come up twice now. Thank you, Droop. Has asked, were you responsible for the ogre butt scratch animation? This is pretty critical.
I have the vaguest memory. I think I'm pretty sure I did it. But oh gosh, I think somebody asked for it. I want to say Bill asked for it, but I can't say for sure.
It's genius. It's genius.
What's something that you might be amused to hear. We attempted some motion capture early on with the animations, and some of that probably survived on the player characters, and the goblin was one of the early monsters, and so we did some motion capture for him, and I was the model for that. And as you may be aware, at least in the old days, motion capture, you'd have all these ping pong balls that were, sort of taped to you on various joints and stuff that the system would capture the motion from. And so when I went to do the death of the goblin, I had all these ping pong balls on me, and I didn't want to just like fall right down on the floor and have these ping pong balls shooting into my body. So I kind of just did this, sort of a collapse. And I didn't even realize that my butt was sticking up in the air at the very end of it, and that goblin death was kind of infamous, I think.
Well, so was the butt crack there before the animation, or did you look at the animation and go, you know what, it needs more butt crack?
No, that was just a happy accident. That was something that Rick Johnson had included on the model, and it just worked out perfectly.
Oh man, I've got to make a note. That is a fair point. I do need to make a note for our concepts to include more butt crack when we get to that point. So one more animation question: the dwarf role. There's a lot of love for the dwarf role, and I guess some anger that the female dwarves didn't roll. Was that you as well? And why would the dwarf roll?
Oh, I honestly don't remember. I wish I could settle this. I was getting a little bit of animation help on some of the player characters. I know some of the human animation and a few of the monsters, like the werewolf, I think. I didn't animate. But I honestly, I couldn't tell you.
When you were given like the list of characters that you guys were plowing through, and I mean it's a fairly sizable list. Were there descriptions for everything, or how much information were you given to sort of kick off concepts?
I think the way first of all, I would look over the list, and I'd identify things that I didn't know what they were, and in those cases I would go and talk to Bill and just say, what the hell is this? There probably were other times when I'd have an idea in my head of how I wanted to approach it, and I would just sort of clear it with Bill. So, for example, the orcs were always described with these kind of Roman ranks, right? centurions and things like this. So that had, that sort of planted something in my head right from the start, and that's why the orcs would get these sort of Roman leather skirts that Roman soldiers would wear. That's sort of the inspiration for that, and I took that even in EQ2 when I was designing some orc environments. I carried that over and tried to add some Roman sort of elements to their culture, just to give it a little specific flavor, so it wasn't just kind of generic monster stuff.
Yeah, and the dragons. I'm trying to think. In chat, definitely remember. I remember Nagy and Vox at the beginning, and then as we get through to Velius, you said there was more assistance on characters and stuff by Velius. With Nagy and Vox, you did those as well?
I'm sorry, which?
For the two original dragons, Nagafin and Lady Vox.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these. So the animations were always a big investment, a big time investment, right? And the more complex the character, the bigger time investment it was. And the dragons were, of course, the biggest time investment of all because they were so complex. The average humanoid character would have something like 46 joints, and the dragons would have, like 150, 170 joints. So there's just a lot more to keep track of. And, we didn't, original EQ, the IK in 3D Studio Max was just crap. It was useless. So basically we had to by hand plant the feet on the ground, and it was just a huge hassle. So the dragons were a lot more work. So I guess this is my long-winded way of saying that we tried to reuse animations as much as possible. So we'd make a dragon and yeah, Tom. Yeah. So we make a dragon, and then we try to get as much use out of those animations as possible. So we take that rig and then apply a different dragon to it.
Makes sense. Were there any characters planned to be basic monsters that became unique bosses, or vice versa?
Well, I mean, yeah, you mean besides like an orc getting a crown and or some
minor
special
modification
texture, and besides that, I can't think of any. It was more the other way around, where we'd have particularly after the initial release of the game, when we got into Kunark. One of the great things was that we knew what the engine could do. We knew what we could do. We knew what we were capable of. So then we got a little more bold with our monsters and with our bosses and things. So there's definitely some characters in there that were much more ambitious than anything we even dreamed of doing in the initial release of the game.
Yeah, it was, and even some of the character and like additional details. It's funny, both the Drolvarg and the Burinai pop up here in the concepts. And when I first saw them as a player, I was pretty blown away. I've always loved the Burinai, just like little badger men. Every time it pops up, I'm so excited to see it. They were, and that was something that was definitely one of those characters where there's no template, right? There's no place you can look and go, oh, where's some reference on Badgermen? Right.
So that was super fun, and that was one that when Bill gave me that, I was pretty stoked.
And do you remember when you, like, I can picture the variations on their armor and stuff. Was that just sort of a thing where you trial and error? Was there some good detail on how to costume them out, or?
Well, that was the sort of thing where if we when again after we started knowing what we were doing, when we would design a new character, we would design all the different versions of it. If it was, so if it was a otter man or a badger man, then we knew we'd have to make like a grunt, and we'd have to make a lieutenant, and we'd have to make a boss, and we'd have to make a magic user. So you had 4 different flavors of the same character that you're going to make. And so you can design them all together, and then they all feel like they're part of the same family, rather than kind of doing it piecemeal. And it's like, oh, this monster's cool. Let's for the next for 2 months after you made the first version of it, it's like, oh, let's make a magic user version of that guy. We got to the point where we knew we would need all the different flavors every time.
Yeah. Well, and some of the accessories and things like that, I could have sworn one of the Burinai, like the sort of the caster models, it's like a carapace or something. It looked like it was either sort of a seed pod or some sort of a carapace from, like, I don't know if it was one of the leeches or what. When you're sitting there, how much do you think about the environment and stuff like that they're in? Is it
possible?
So sorry, sorry. It was another one of those hitches. So I didn't realize you were talking. I was like, I should have put a question mark at the end of that sentence. Let's go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah. I mean, we definitely try to instill as much character as possible in the designs, and just. I mean, I don't remember specifically asking these questions on EQ. I remember on EQ2, I would actually have a meeting with Bill, and I'd sit down, and we'd have a good couple hour discussion about some new race that we were going to be introducing or going to be working on, and what their technological level is, and what sort of environment they come from, and all this kind of stuff, and bounce ideas off of each other. And it was a really fun collaboration for sure.
How serious was the tone meant to be? There's a lot of, like, sort of silly and charming in there as well. I mean, there's also the heads on spikes and dwarves that have been cut in half, but still a lot of kind of fun.
Yes. So Brad was very much of he wanted to keep it really straight and really serious and really and not have any kind of I mean, I don't think he wanted it to be humorless, but he didn't want any humor at the expense of any of the characters or the threatening situations or anything like that. And I sort of feel like he was the only one that felt that way. Certainly the artists wanted to have some humor and some flavor and some fun in there. And so I think a lot of that sort of stuff came from that. And I think even Brad was, once you have the butt scratch in there, I think he was the sort of guy that's like, oh yeah, that's cool. Let's keep that.
Yeah, and I can picture the fungus man sort of walking around and some other things like that.
Right. Yeah, and there's other things that are just if it's in character, then it can be fun and cool.
Question that came up was how did you guys generate so many texture variations for the character's gear back then?
Well, it was necessity is the mother of invention. Part of creating a new texture was just the low-hanging fruit of creating a new monster. If you can create a new monster by just swapping out the texture, then that's a big win. So that's where that comes from. It's relatively easy from the art standpoint to you take the same model, take the same animation set, give it a new name, give it a texture, call it done. And then, then you hand it off to a designer to, create new stats for it and then, put it in a zone.
Yeah, it was funny. Whenever we're kicking off a new expansion, there'd be this sort of bargaining that would take place with the art team. We'd be like, how many new characters can we get in this amount of time? And then we would get X number of models, and then we could come back and go, all right, how many texture variations can I get if we trade in one model? So it'd be like, you're getting 6 new models. Okay, what if we get 5 new models? How many texture variations can we get for the other models, right? And there's just sort of back and forth until we landed where we'd have in theory, enough variations, especially if we reuse a old model. Let's see. Were there any scrapped ideas for races in EQ1 that you can recall?
I don't recall any scrapped races. I kind of wish we had scrapped a few races because it was so many. It was just it was so many to launch with. I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling to think about how many races we released with, and every time you added an armor, you had to multiply it by how many player races you had.
Right.
So it was just it was a huge burden. It was a big job to add anything to the character races.
And a much earlier question, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask it. Do you remember how the dark elf female sort of thong look came to be? Because they kind of had their butt hanging out when they weren't in armor.
I am gonna put that one on Rosie, I think, or maybe Rick.
That's the way to do it.
I don't remember drawing the backside, so I don't think that was my fault.
I don't remember drawing the backside. That works. So, all right, you get to California, and you're at the company doing the mobile phone game. From there, where did you go?
From there, I went to PopCap. I was hired as the studio art director for PopCap, looking after 7 or 8 artists there. I was there when we shipped Plants vs. Zombies and Bejeweled 3 and Zuma's Revenge and Hegel Knights and a few other PopCap titles.
And for you, did it feel? I mean, PopCap and the previous company, did it feel similar to MMOs? Is it sort of once you're in a creative environment, you're making art for games, or they're kind of, it feels the same, or is there a different vibe?
There's similarities and there's differences. I mean, the casual space is just a really different space in general. And we had a couple of titles that were sort of the infancy of the mobile world that was fast approaching. So Bejeweled Blitz, which was super popular on Facebook, had originated during that time, and that was for me it was kind of familiar that it was this game as a service kind of mentality,
Right.
and constantly sort of updating and creating new content to keep people coming back and playing. So that actually felt kind of familiar. But the casual space was just a really different thing, and PopCap just had a really different vibe, a really different sort of approach to work, where there was this sort of ethic of constant iteration, just continually iterating and iterating and iterating on an idea and kind of buffing it to a sheen, just adding polish upon polish upon polish, and that was something that was kind of different from this sort of seat of your pants, make up a monster and throw it in the game, and I mean, for EQ, one of the monsters I had created, we weren't getting any. Everybody else was up busy, so we were just sort of trying to create monsters just to have something to do, and one of the monsters I came up with was this sort of hand creature that walked on fingers, and its index,
the hand.
Yeah, yes, the
oh
hand.
My god, it's so good.
So that was an idea that I just had come up with just because I didn't know what else to do, and and like I said, it was just sort of seat of your pants. We came up with the idea and we decided to go with it, and it PopCap was not that kind of place, where you could just sort of come up with an idea and throw it into the mix, and it would just stay there. So PopCap was definitely. I mean, I'm not knocking it. It was just a different sort of place to be.
What can you speak to what was? How did those decisions to iterate get made? What was driving it? Was it a feel thing? Were they getting data in? Were they player testing, doing A/B tests?
No, it was very much a feel thing. A lot of it just came from Jason Kapalka, who was the sort of the creative director of the company, and really, one of those guys that really, game design is just second nature to him, and really just kind of just the way he thinks, and he's really pretty brilliant at it. Which I mean, I throw Bill into that same category, actually. So a lot of it came from him, but it was a shared kind of ethic. So it started with Jason, but everybody would kind of approach games the same way, in trying to see, how do I plus one this? How do I, what is the critique I can give that will make this more fun? That sort of thing.
Right. It feels like with EQ, like you were just describing it, there's so much to do. You guys took on such a massive amount. Whereas I have to imagine with a lot of the PopCap games, it's a fairly constrained cast and setting, and you're not having to make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different things as opposed to refining just what's there. Yeah.
Right. Well, and the teams were a lot smaller too. I mean, that's the other thing, is that 90% of Plants vs. Zombies was made by 3 guys.
Makes sense.
So So it's you have that team and you work on something for 2 or 3 years and you're just sort of constantly polishing it,
Yeah.
which is different, just a different sort of beast than an MMO.
Right. Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. The question chat: who decided to make "Ode to Joy" the victory song in Peggle? That was genius. I don't know if you have that information on hand.
I would guess Jason Kapalka. I don't actually know that for a fact, but I seems likely that it was Jason that came up with that. It seems like his sort of sense of humor. I mean, that's the other thing about PopCap is that they really embrace the humor. They were not afraid to put humor in their games, and it's still something that I think is underrepresented in the game industry. I think people are way too shy to put humor in their games. It's a little better now than it used to be, but
Sure.
but I still think we could use more humor in games.
Yeah, and I think depending on the depending on the game, definitely seem to see more of it. It goes back to kind of the earlier topic of like Brad and to what degree do you take things sort of seriously and try to establish like a sense of world that's serious, but then can you be serious or take yourself serious, but then also have that humor, especially if it's internally consistent. I've been referring to it for the last, I guess now going on 2 years. I didn't realize it, but yeah, is there's a charm. Yeah, I just keep thinking charm, right? And and to me, it's even the things that aren't necessarily meant to be humorous. Like if I look at the concepts that pop up, they're not meant to be funny or charming or whatever. I guess I don't know, but when I look at like the dragon that's up now, or if I look at that versus a halfling versus the golem that appears, they're internally consistent, but there's something to them where it's like I can still be scared in this situation. I can still feel like this is a consistent world, but it's also got like this lovable, almost kind of fairy tale feel to it that taps into that inner child.
Right.
And then when you mention the hand, that's the disembodied hand for me is just it really nails it, because then this thing's coming in. People in chat mentioned it was just terrifying the first time you see it, but then when when you look at like the way it was painted and everything, and it's got sort of this Disney-esque feel to it. Yeah, it's a nice juxtaposition in EQ. It's because it's a pain in the ass when you get killed. It's definitely penalizing. You don't want to do it, and here you are getting killed by this horrendous yet kind of fun disembodied hand with a mouth at the bottom.
It was a real pleasure to animate, as I recall.
Yeah. So after that's a great point in chat. I always thought that EQ's monster design reminded me of the first edition monster manual. Like it really it does tap into that vibe. Yeah.
Thanks.
The so after PopCap, where did you go? I'm slowly working you towards Germany since we're both sitting here at the moment.
That's fine. That's fine. So after PopCap, I went to Wild Tangent. I was starting up a new studio there. So, and it was mobile games again, like at PopCap for the most part, and we made some cool products there. I can't say any of them really sort of took off or made any kind of real dent in the world, but we made some cool stuff, and it was a very small studio, and it was a satellite studio, so we were on our own for most of the time, and so we had a lot of fun, and we made some cool stuff.
I could have sworn they were I could have sworn I mainly know them from their tech as well. There was something
Yes.
I consider them more of like a tech company when I think back on it.
Yeah, they're tech company and a portal. They had a game portal that that I think was the majority of their revenue. And they had made games for a while, and then they stopped for a period of time. And then this was an attempt to sort of get back into the game, and trying to make that transition from like browser games or PC games to mobile games. And it wasn't really that successful. But like I said, I think I have no regrets as far as the products that we made. We made some good games. We made some fun games.
Cool.
And then after that, I got a call from Good Game in Hamburg, Germany, and they recruited me to be. It's a large company here, and they had a number of different sort of studios within the company, and I was asked to be the studio director for one of those studios within the company. And so I became the studio art director for that group. There was 3 games for that group when I started out. As you know, not every game makes it all the way to market. Yeah. So the 2 of those games kind of slid by the wayside, and but one game we did finish, and it did go live. And again, it was another really great game. I think it had a lot of potential, but it didn't really get the support that it needed. And I didn't get a chance to see it through because Good Game, a year into it, into my time there, they just had a massive layoff. They basically cut the size of the company in half. It was 1,300 people, and they cut it down to like 600 or 700. So I was part of that big layoff, and then I got a job. Remarkably, I still got a job in Hamburg at the other big company, one of the other big companies in town, which is InnoGames. I was a lead artist on a project they were starting up. That went on for about 9 months, and we kind of realized that project wasn't really going anywhere. And then I moved over to the marketing team, and I've been a working marketing artist since then. And it's been kind of nice to sort of set aside the management thing and just be making art all day.
Yeah. When was that at Good Game? Because I'm trying to think. I got to Hamburg in 2015, and by the time I got there, the company I was at, Big Point, had already done its similar thing. I think 2012 or something like that. They had like a 600 person layoff, which I think was one of the kind of first of the sort in the area, because I know I'd read about the company while I was still in the US, because it was like, oh, this German game company no one's ever heard of had 1,200 people and laid off half of them, which immediately sparked a works council. So that was the first time I'd worked at a game company that had kind of an internal union per German law. Right. And so that was very interesting to sort of see how that worked and the implications and the difference in work-life balance in Germany versus what I'd previously experienced.
Right.
But I think that was a few years before the Good Game stuff.
Yeah, so I started a Good Game in late 2015, and then around October 2016 is when the big layoff was.
Yeah. I think, the only time I've run into it was at Sony. 11 years in, finally got caught in one of the big layoffs, and I got to say, my feeling then was like, man, that was great timing. I wish they had laid me off a few years earlier, to be honest, but it was nice to get DC Universe done. It was just one of those ones that once it was done, I was like, oh, it's like a bad divorce. It's like, that probably should have happened a few years earlier. I feel so much better now.
Yes. Yeah, sometimes it works out like that.
So, with the ability to just sort of focus on art now, has that sparked additional creativity? What else are you doing?
Well, it's funny you should ask. So I've been working on a project with some friends now for I guess it's a couple of years now, and it's sort of a interactive comic book, I guess you'd call it.
Oh, cool.
And I don't know if I can share my screen or something here. I guess I could do that with Discord.
Yeah,
right?
it probably. I may have to click some things and rearrange something in Streamlabs, but I'm happy to do it.
Let me.
We can figure it out.
Yeah, let me share my screen if I can.
All right. So if I take the window that I modified, I'll wait for you to bring it up so I'm not showing everybody your desktop.
Oh, you can.
You can go ahead.
There we go. Are you still there? Are we still in business?
We're still in business. I'm making some adjustments. We're doing this. We're doing it live. We are doing it live. And then we'll do this like so. Then we'll make this bigger. Then we'll click on this. We'll hide it. Perfect. Expert level.
Well done.
Cool.
All right. I mean, I'll try not to bore you here. I'll just sort of click through these real fast. But
I doubt it will be boring. You you do what you need to do.
So this is an interactive comic book. It's sort of a sci-fi space opera kind of thing, and it's you'll see lots of crazy characters. Some of them might even feel like they came from EQ.
Yeah, I was about to say, like the art style already.
And
That the architecture back there looked familiar as well. I found a number of architectural concepts, but I was trying to find your signature on them. I didn't want to, have the faux pas of like showing somebody else's work. It's like, oh, but it was interesting when I just saw that last piece. I immediately thought of some Kunark concepts that I've seen.
yeah, Rick and I both did a bunch of Kunark concepts. For the world as well, and then on EQ2 I did a lot of environment concept work. So a lot of this that you're seeing here, I'm doing all the drawings. Some of it I colored, and some of it I'm getting some color help. And I'm basically coming up with the story and co-writing with our designer, and yes, this will be a mobile app that you'll be able to download and buy new adventures. We also plan on having a store where you can get all sorts of merch.
Nice.
And yeah, it's the goal is to be a pretty sweeping kind of space opera, trying to free these fabricant slaves from the evil slave owners.
Nice. The art. I mean, man, even like the computer panels and stuff. And I think it was a frame or two back. It was just like, as soon as I see those shapes, I immediately, your style is your style, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I see it and I'm like, oh shit, I love it. So
yeah, it's you're not the first person to observe that that I have a distinct style.
You sir have a style. Oh man, what's going on there? A bit of romance, gratitude.
It's a little girl that wants to buy this cute little critter, but the critter doesn't really want to be bought.
Yeah, I could tell by the face. So did you say it was it's more of a comic, or did I forget, what did you say is like branching comic?
So, yeah. So it's a comic, but there's points in the story. There are branches where you make decisions, and it affects where the story goes from there. And we have created. Let's see, we've completed 5-6 episodes, and we're in various points of production on the next 3 or 4. So it's well along its way.
Nice. And then in terms of like distribution, getting it out, what are you guys thinking there?
It's gonna be a mobile app.
Cool.
So, because that's the world we all come from.
Yeah, it makes makes sense. It's been nice for the last couple of years just thinking about PC again.
I bet. I also have a short video.
Oh, cool.
That sort of walks you through it.
Let's check that out. I was just making the image the window a little bit bigger to be able to see everything on it.
Yeah, that would be good. Let's see.
Oh, this will be an interesting one.
Yeah,
streaming in video. I don't think well, it shouldn't be any different than streaming in video. I don't know why that feels different to me. Streaming in a video instead of streaming in video.
Let me just give me a second here.
Cool.
Crap.
I will do this. I will hide you for now. I'll keep an eye on things and then we'll make adjustments.
I just need to find a link here real fast.
Adjustments will be made.
Right, so there is sound. I don't know if that's going to carry over or not.
I would be shocked if it does, but let's see.
Now I need to find you again. Nope, there you are. All right, so I'm already on my end.
Okay. Hit play and then hit pause, and I'll see if I can get everything set up. Because when you're streaming your desktop, that worked fine just now, but I don't see anything popping up on my end.
Am I still? Maybe I'm no longer sharing. Let me make sure I'm sharing.
Okay. While you're doing that, Belfaster asks, not to put anyone on the spot, but has Rick had a chance to see the Eminem concept art? I know we've discussed it in the past, and I've shown some stuff that we've had. I might have sent image of the races when they got done, but I'm not 100% sure. Belfaster.
Let's see. I'm sorry. I'm being really slow here.
Ah, no problem. There's a question in chat. What is the name of the app/comic? If you can get it.
You'll see in a minute if I get this friggin' thing working. Here we go. Here. Oh no, that's not it. Okay, sorry. Let me try one more time.
Let's see, scrolling up, make sure I didn't miss any questions in there. Ooh, that was a good one by Tom. We'll have to load it up for later. I'm just gonna read it out and then I'll read it again when you're not concentrating on getting that stuff going. Tom Toby had asked, Rick, did you ever get to the point on EQ concepting monsters where you're like, okay, how do I top that last one?
Well, that's where the hand came from. I was desperate for ideas.
Yeah.
All right. You know what? Here, how about this? How about I send you the link and see if you can play it?
We may be able to do that. Yeah, send me the link.
Let me try that.
And I'll even, what you can do is you send me the link, and then turn your camera back on. I'll get you back up here. And then I will get that set up. I'll probably just have to have a, new window or, yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll get it going. Apologies to folks. I've been clicking the mute button and burping, and I realized when I did it the first time that I'd muted the burp for all of you, but not for Rick. And I was like, I bet he thinks I just burped right into the microphone.
I can honestly tell you that I didn't hear it.
Okay, good. I was very self-conscious after that. I was like, how am I going to explain to him that I was being professional and muted it? Though, I mean, anybody that watches the stream knows it's always after dinner for me here. It's morning for folks there, but it's like, this is the gassiest stream on Twitch right now. It's the gassiest stream on Twitch always. And I'm so apologetic. I really do feel for you guys, but like, it's 8 o'clock and I'm just eating dinner as quickly as possible to be able to come in and hang out with you guys. And I had half a Red Bull before this one because I wanted to make sure that I had enough energy to not seem lame. Because
So I sent you the link.
Okay. You sent me the link. Okay. And there it is. Cool. All right. So do you want to open this? Yes, I do want to open it, and I want to immediately pause it. And then now if you come back on camera, I'll get you set up. And then we'll see if I can get all of the rest of this figured out as well.
My back?
I do not see you. I still see your wonderful profile icon.
Camera on. I'm getting the swinging squares, so maybe it's just not gonna.
If you turn your camera off and back on again, sometimes that'll do it.
No, that didn't do any good.
Oh man. Okay, so what I'll do then is let's get this set up instead. I will see if I can go to studio mode. I will go to browser Let's see. Boom. Okay, so I got that. That looks good. I'll bring this up. And I think we got this now. Cool. Clean that up a little bit. Hide that. And that. And that. And I will make it bigger for everybody. And we may get audio. With the luck that I have with audio, sometimes it's hard to tell, but let's back this up a little bit. I will then do this. And then I will hit play and we will see. Moment of truth. Slobs is saying there's audio. Nice. I can't personally hear it, but
I can't hear it either. But that's okay. The visuals are also, I think they carry the idea.
yeah, chat hears it.
Okay, cool.
Nice. Cool. I'm glad you guys were able to hear it. Sippy Cup said it looks like the old books with Pick a Path, but animated.
Yeah, basically.
Nice. Yeah, I used to love those books. I want to watch a video again. I'll watch a video again after the stream where I can pay attention to it a little bit better, and also hear it. It looked really, really cute. It looked nice.
Yeah, it's definitely been a labor of love. We've been, like I said, we've been working on it a couple of years now, and it's been an enormous amount of work. But we're nearly there. Probably in Q2 we'll go live with it, and I'll bug everyone ad nauseum about it.
Oh, yeah, definitely let us know. It'd be our pleasure to take a look and make sure that everybody can find it and knows to go look for it and all of that. Yeah, so I don't have an image of you, but I think we can still go through a couple more questions if that's good. And I also know it's almost 10 o'clock our time, so I don't want to keep you too late. But let's see. One of the questions that came up earlier, I know we touched on it a bit, and Zukin had asked, but kind of want to, while I've got you here, go into it some. That again, the evolution of the concept to 3D and the degree to which a concept is literal versus inspiration for creating 3D art. Is there something you could speak to there that maybe you didn't hit on before?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as the low poly thing is concerned, it's part of it is doing a drawing that is still sort of focused on the big shapes and I mean my drawing style, as you can see, tends to be sort of blocky and angular to begin with. Mm-hmm. So I guess in some ways it kind of lends itself to a low poly sort of approach. But also, the modeler needs to sort of have an eye for it as well, and sort of be able to make decisions about, that bicep has a certain shape. How do I represent that? When I only have, 8 or 10, polys to work with.
Right.
So it's the alchemy is in that sort of thing. As you get more, as you get higher poly models, as you get more sophisticated, then there's less of that and more just being sensitive to the subtleties of what's in a drawing, and that there's a lot of specifics. So, for example, in my current job, I art direct videos that are made for our company that are like 3D videos that that we do the character designs, we do maybe we do some environmental designs or things like that. We make the storyboards and write the script and all that sort of thing, and then we give it to a outsourced company, an outsourced studio to actually produce the piece. But we continue to give them art direction and feedback all the way along. So, I have my picture back. Maybe I can.
So, I went ahead and just went with your profile pic.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway. When so like today, literally this morning, I got an image of a character for a video that we're working on, and it was the first pass on the character. It looked pretty good. It looked pretty close, but there was a number of sort of subtle things that we want to make sure are there that were in the drawings that we gave them, but for one reason or another, the artist didn't notice them, or didn't necessarily have that, see the subtle differences. And sometimes they're so subtle that I don't expect anyone to notice it. It's something I'm going to be picky about, but maybe other people wouldn't be.
Right.
But and then it's just a matter of calling it out and pointing out the things that need to change and to just get it over the finish line. So it's a lot of it just depends on what's the end use, what's the the level of detail on the end model, and of the modeler, because they just it's different needs for different different environments.
Right. Yeah, it's we've been talking a lot about those details in the concept work that we've been doing for the game that we're working on right now, Monsters and Memories, and it's interesting how much discussion we have about some of those little details, though, because it's like it's a key element that we feel sort of sets that character apart, or tells a particular part of the story that's important. And it's actually been a very fun process for me, because as somebody that's traditionally been in design and then in production, I haven't had the opportunity to have so much time to discuss art with artists, especially at the concept stage. And it's kind of eye-opening to me how much you can really get into those details and refine them to try to use one small little piece to tell a much bigger story. And so when you were mentioning, as a detail that is maybe important to you but not to other people, I immediately thought about that aspect of it, where little details can actually be a pretty big deal. So it seems like when that's the case, you jump on it.
Yeah, for sure. It's I mean, in the low poly environment, and again, looking at some of these characters again, and refreshing my memory on them, there's a bunch of stuff that's sort of the standard stuff that you always hear about, but it's not something that you necessarily think about until you're really kind of in the weeds on it. So, for example, part of character design is that you want to on one hand, you want to like echo shapes within a character, so that there's this. It helps to sort of create an iconic silhouette for the character, and then, but by the same token, you want to contrast that with shapes that are sort of in opposition to those shapes. So, in other words, including roundish shapes, but also adding a few square accents here and there to break it up. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to just so kind of describe. It's much easier to sort of look at a image and look at a drawing and sort of point out, oh, here's where you're echoing the shapes, and here's where you're contrasting them. So
right. Yeah. Let's see. We've got one more question that came in, but I feel like we hit it a little bit. Maybe it's covered in the VOD, but I'm trying to think back to the beginning of the VOD as well, and I know it's come up twice now. Just that transition from digital art to traditional art, in that process for you. I remember you hit on it, but it was also one of the first things that we covered, and I was wondering if there's any, if you'd mind sort of elaborating on that.
Well, it was something that I kind of lucked out, because whenever the new technology was coming into play, I always got trained on it by the company I was working on, because nobody knew how to do it because it was new.
Right.
And so the company always had to end up training me. So, for example, when I first started producing any kind of artwork or image on a computer, it was in my my newspaper job doing ad layout. We'd create spec ads where we'd create just a sort of a dummy ad that we would show a potential client and say, hey, this is what your ad can look like in the newspaper.
Right.
And we were just using just the earliest version of Illustrator for that, for some of those sorts of tasks. And it was my introduction to computers, but it was everybody's introduction to computers.
Right.
We'd actually have we'd have a class where someone would come in, a teacher would come in, and they'd set up a bunch of machines in a big meeting room, and we'd all get taught how to use this thing. And then when I went to Jostens Learning, I had to learn dpaint. And I mean, it's not that hard of a thing to learn, but it was just accepted that they wouldn't be able to hire artists that already knew how to do this. So training was just part of the natural process of hiring a new artist.
That makes sense.
Unlike today, where if you're working on a game, the expectation is they know how to use the software you're using. So that's it, and pretty much at every step of the way, I was learning the software on the way, because there wasn't any internal tribal knowledge of how to do it, or it was something that was so new or so proprietary that there was no expectation that you would know how to use it.
And so with those hurdles out of the way, over the years, did you find that that was always kind of the case, where there's new software coming up on a new standard, so you've got to sort of stay on top of that, so that builds in sort of the I don't want to call it a time sink, but essentially, there's always that sort of sense of having to learn new tools in one way or another? Or do you feel like it sort of unblocked you over time? Things got maybe easier, the pipeline got easier, and you're able to just focus more on the creative aspect?
Well, eventually I moved into management and art direction, and in a way that kind of led to it sort of took me off of that cycle. So it's I'm not really much of a modeler. I'm not the person you would hire to go in and make 3D stuff. It's just outside of my wheelhouse now. I could probably get back up to speed on animating a character or stuff or something like that. But even then, there's lots of new technical tricks and things that I'm just not aware of. So in a lot of ways, it's the technical stuff is there's so much of it there now that I haven't kept up on that it's probably beyond my skill set now.
Well, if it's been anything for you, like what I saw, even in design, and then since then, I found when I became a producer, it was less stressful than when I was like a lead designer, because we'd have these young kids, I mean, in their 20s, but they'd come out of like SMU or, the Guildhall program or something like that. And they were so good. And they'd basically been playing video games since they were born, if not before. And just so they knew every game, they played everything. They had great design sense. They had great technical chops. And then it was like, as a lead, I was like, all right, so what is it? How can I help them? Like what, and what is it that I'm actually here for, and it was an interesting sort of learning process to try to figure out what skills then carried throughout the entirety of sort of my growth that could be passed over. What if, as an artist, what have you found sort of some of those key things have been?
Well, some of the key things. It's something I tell people about my art education. There's a lot of people these days who sort of gripe about art education, and don't people advising young people, don't spend your money on art school because it's going to be a waste of money. Blah blah blah. I can't speak to other people's experiences. I know my experience is that the art history that I learned in school, I continue to use and value every day. It's just having that base knowledge of what people have done in different ages, and if I have an idea in my head of what I want something to look like, I know where I need to go to look to find it, and I know what sort of thing I'm looking for. That's always been hugely valuable to me. So that's one of the things I think I bring to bear, and also just having a traditional art background. Not only do I have the language to talk about art and to be able to art direct, but I also have the drawing skills to be able to like take a screenshot and go in, and redline what I think needs to happen with a piece of art to improve it or make it more appropriate for the job we're working on, or to get it into the right style that we want for the project. Those are all skills that don't go away, and they're not technology dependent. And in fact, as technology gets better, then in theory, we can get even more and more subtle with our feedback and what artists are capable of.
Right.
I also find that that's something of an advantage in so much as that I think a lot of young artists, they're especially if the schools that they're coming from, the game schools that are producing these artists, they aren't necessarily getting this kind of art history background and the sort of rich, full-bodied sort of education that I was fortunate enough to get. And so their frame of reference is largely other games, and not much outside of that. And so I feel like I have something to offer there as well, to maybe broaden some horizons and bring some thoughts and ideas and references that some younger artists may not even be aware of.
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's again, and I know I've said this before, and apologies to chat for sort of repeating it and not to make you feel sort of awkward or on the spot or whatever, but as you're describing this stuff, as we've been talking tonight, and again, the concepts that I do have, the few that I have up here as I scroll by, it's interest, or it's I have to say there's a bit of like starstruckness for me as thinking back at the characters that you've created. EverQuest is such a massive part of so many of our lives, and has, I think as much as it gets discussed, has kind of a understated impact these days. It's nice for, whenever I do hear someone talk about MMO history, they bring it up, but it's just it's pretty massive, the legacy of the characters that you've created, like the legacy that they have, and yeah, I don't know if it feels that way to you, if you stop and think about it or what, but it's pretty huge.
Well, thank you. That's extremely flattering to hear. I mean, I generally don't think of it in those terms, but I do know that when I look at like the history of animation, and I read stories of these pioneers, these Disney and Warner Brother artists that were working in the 30s and 40s, and they were inventing all this stuff. They were making so much up, and there wasn't any sort of template or any guide other than like silent movies or something like that for just timing and comedic ideas. But these guys were just making up so much stuff from whole cloth, but in the midst of it, they didn't know that they were inventing a new art form, or they didn't, they weren't thinking about it in those terms. They were just thinking about, hey, I want to make this cool thing. I want to make something funnier. How do I do that? How do I, what do I need to learn about my craft to make this better? And they have all the all the same sort of problems and issues that all of us have, complaining about bosses, or the guys upstairs, or they don't understand what we're doing, and all this sort of regular day-to-day kind of stuff. And I guess this is my way of saying that you don't always recognize when you're in the midst of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you're doing, and how it's going to affect people. You're just kind of plugging away and doing the best you can, and maybe having some fun along the way. And if I can look back on my time on EQ and maybe capture a little bit of that kind of magic, then that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So one last question, and I will well, actually two last questions. Okay. One, was there anything Was there anything that I forgot to ask?
Yeah.
Can you think of anything? I'll feel so bad to have this opportunity to have you on and not cover all of it, but you're always welcome back, even if you've only got 30 minutes or an hour or something at some point. Chat or anybody on YouTube, if you're watching this and you spot some obvious stuff that I forgot to ask, let me know, and then we'll see if we can follow up. But yeah, you're absolutely always welcome. And then, yeah, if you can think anything right now, feel free.
There's nothing that you've forgotten to ask that I can think of. There is one small story that people might enjoy hearing.
Nice.
So my father-in-law, for a period of time, my father-in-law was a sort of a home nurse. He'd go to people's homes and help them out. They'd be disabled or or they would need some kind of in-home care, and so he would visit people for a few hours and provide this sort of care. And he had one patient for a time that it was a paraplegic man, and I had the distinct pleasure of meeting this gentleman. He was a big EQ player, and one of his favorite things to do was just to go into EQ and just sort of run around, because it was something that he couldn't do in the real world. He had become a paraplegic through a swimming accident, and he actually even worked up the nerve to swim in EQ. He found that he was very proud of himself and found that a big sort of milestone for himself. And so, it's something I reflect on every once in a while and feel like, as a team, we did something that was pretty cool. And I just want to make sure that particularly for the other people who are involved in making and working on the game, that they hear that story and know that they affected at least one person in a really deep and meaningful way.
It's a great story. Yeah. Yep. Nice. And so you're just up the river. I think it's the same river. You're not very far from here. And man, I miss Hamburg. So hopefully once all the COVID stuff chills out, my wife and I will definitely be back up there. It'd be great to meet up and chat some more.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. We need to. Well, and you're in Bremen, right?
Yep, just down in Bremen.
Yeah, I love Bremen. So that's one of my favorite places to visit for just a nice day trip. So who knows? Maybe if we get something calm in the next month or two, I'll find myself there.
Yeah, and when it warms up, it's a great waterfront. So yeah.
Yep.
Cool. And one last question Tom Toby had asked. How's your family liking Germany?
We like it a lot. Before COVID hit, we've been doing an enormous amount of travel. And again, the whole art history thing helps with that. So my wife and I, my wife's also an artist, and we've just every chance we get, we travel. And we've been all over Europe. We've hit like 50 plus cities and I don't know, 20 something countries or something ridiculous like that. And hey puppy. Yeah, it's been great. And my son just started going to college in the U.S. in person, but he's been living with us here since we got here. And he went to the international school here in Hamburg, and that was a pretty remarkable experience for him too, to be going to school with kids from all over the world. So it's been really cool.
Cool. Yeah, and it definitely sounds like you guys have done a much better job than I have of getting around. Once everything settles back down, I remember when we first spoke, you had mentioned all the traveling you'd done. And it was pretty inspiring. I was like, I've got to get off my ass and actually get out a bit more. So, yeah. Well, Rick, thank you so much for your time. If you think of anything that we missed, please let me know. And like I said, it's always our pleasure to have you back on. I'll keep an eye out for questions and things like that. And if it's just like a little one-off or something, I'll just shoot it to you directly, like I did the other day, and see if we can get it answered and get it back to folks. And yeah, a couple questions about us showing off our Monsters and Memories art to you and getting your impressions. If you don't mind, and if there's no conflict there, I'm happy to always share that and kind of see what you think. So,
Absolutely. No, this has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this, and there was some really great questions, and yeah, it was really cool for me too.
Cool. All right. So what I'll do is we'll hang up here on Discord, and then I'll follow up with you afterwards, and then I'll work with the chat here, and we'll wind down the stream.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thank you. Have a great night, and I'll follow up with you right after this.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye, Rick.